On this week's edition of The Communicators, more interviews from the recently held cable show sponsored by the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. It was held in Los Angeles in May of this year. Child safety on the internet is a common concern for attorneys general across the nation, including Maryland's Douglas Gansler. In this interview with C-SPAN's Susan Swain, he talks about online safety in light of rapidly changing technology.
General Gensler, we were talking off camera about the incredible technology in this show and how fast it's developing. That puts someone like you who are on the caretaker side, government or parents or educators, in a tough bind because kids are quicker adapters. The technology is moving really quickly. And how do you keep up with the opportunities and threats that are faced by young people who you're charged to protect?
Well, you're right. I mean, the technology is literally and figuratively light years ahead of law enforcement, regulators, and even investigators in terms of what we can do in technology and identifying the people who are causing threats to children over the internet. And, you know, the whole idea of the internet in terms of insidious behavior is that it's shrouded in anonymity. These people work anonymously and they kind of splatter all their stuff out there, particularly sexual child predators. There's 50,000 predators on at any moment on the internet. So to identify them, find them with the technological advances that occur is very difficult. And it actually makes it hard to pass laws that are relevant as well, because the laws themselves can become obsolete over a short period of time as technology goes. A great example is sexting. You know, no one even knew what sexting was or heard of it 2 years ago, and now it's sort of the rage among all the children, kids with cell phones. So we have to try and keep up. We do the best we can. I think we're doing a pretty good job. The attorneys general themselves have actually become sort of the internet police, if you will. You know, if you look at local district attorneys, they're doing a lot of street crime, murder, rape, arson, that kind of thing, and then the feds are doing much more focus on homeland security and terrorism. So there's this big vacuum on who's policing the internet, who's looking out, who's regulating the internet, and a lot of it's kind of fallen in the laps of attorneys general collectively.
But it seems, let's stay with enforcement and prosecution, it seems that you would inherently have a problem with in the trans-border communications. Whose jurisdictions would it be, if not federal then, if someone's texting it or tracking a child from another state?
Yeah, and the laws are in their infancy, and that's a poignant point, which is how do you even get standing? Where is standing? And it's really becoming the sort of where it's settling is standing is going to be wherever either the criminal act occurs or where the person who is on the internet sitting is causing that act to occur. In both, there'd be concurrent jurisdiction. Obviously, there'd be double jeopardy issues potentially down the road. But those are issues in and to themselves. Then you have to put the person, once you identify the computer where it's coming from, you actually have to put the person in the seat at the time that maybe an email or some sort of message was sent out or some sort of child pornography was sent out. So it's very difficult to apprehend these people. The feds used to do a great job. They did, particularly in the sexual predator arena, and they've backed off a little bit and left it a little bit to attorneys general. But then you get the other issue, which is the international flavor of some of this. I mean, these scams where they say, you know, your long-lost relative in Nigeria has just died, just send us $2,000 and we'll get you your $1 million. Well, it must work because they keep sending them out, right? So somebody's doing that. We don't have jurisdiction over them. Nobody in sort of local law enforcement does. So there are definitely issues of standing that arise all the time.
It looks like in reading about what you've been doing in Maryland that in addition to the enforcement side, you've been looking at the education side and really starting statewide efforts to make kids better consumers. How's that going for you? It's
going well, and it's critical in this effort because, I mean, if you look at things like seat belts, designated drivers, even drunk driving, you know, these are areas that years ago there was a very different culture surrounding them. We have to teach kids that there are dangers on the internet. It's a wonderful tool. It's an incredible tool. The world's literally at your fingertips. That said, there's an insidious dark underbelly of it, and we need to make sure that they are aware of that. I mean, even as simple things as things you put on your Facebook page can and will be seen by your school, will be seen by the colleges you may want to go to and prospective employers. And they feel like they're vulnerable, and we need to teach them that that's just not the case. Cyberbullying is a real issue. It occurs all the time. Those are kinds of things we need to do. What we're doing in Maryland is we start a program called CLICS, where we train the trainers. So we work with NetSmarts, which is part of the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We work collaboratively with them to go out and teach teachers, to teach Boy Scout and Girl Scout leaders, librarians, law enforcement, to actually teach kids internet safety, because the reality is no public school system in Maryland teaches internet safety. And we really rely on the kids, because most kids know more than their parents and certainly their grandparents about internet. And so we rely on the kids to teach each other, and that just doesn't work.
Well, picking up on your No School Teaches, are you arguing to the education community that this ought to become a regular part of the school curriculum in the state?
We do, and there's a lot of resistance from the education community to expand the curriculum into anything. So we got to figure out how to do it where it's not sort of a whole course, but where they're exposed and they understand it. Particularly the younger kids. I do them myself. I go talk to the 3rd and 4th graders, and you can gain a comfort level within an hour with these kids, where you walk in and say, who of you has ever been on a social networking website, and who of you have a Facebook or MySpace page? The answer is universally none. No hands go up. But after the session, after you teach them, after we go through our clicks presentation, half or 3/4, all of a sudden, yeah, I've been on it, and in fact, I have my own page. And so you really need to learn, talk to them. Where we used to be focused as attorneys general, interestingly, was on something called age verification, where we could keep kids under 14 years old off of Facebook, off of MySpace, and sort of reduce the supply, if you will, for sexual predators to go after. We've actually backed off that a little bit and more into the education component. Try and demystify the internet, but tell them, here are the dangers, here are the pitfalls, here are the things you need to look for to protect yourself. And then, of course, with adults, we're kind of moving into new areas in terms of privacy issues, deceptive advertising issues. Is the industry regulating itself enough? Do they have enough people sort of regulating? The bigger companies, the Googles, the eBays do, because their very integrity and credibility relies on people actually sending the product, for example, on eBay, once the money is sent. And if that breaks down, then people won't go on eBay. So they have an incentive to do that. But there are other websites that don't have that kind of an incentive, and we try and make sure that they do regulate themselves.
Let's spend a minute on privacy and kids. You referenced about how their trail stays behind them if they're applying for schools, but it would seem too that that just understanding the challenges of exposing you and your family as information without understanding that there are lots of people, legitimate and non-legitimate, out there wanting to scoop it up. How do you emphasize that part of internet understanding?
Well, there's two components to that. One is on the social networking websites like the Facebook, the very purpose of it is to expose yourself. So you're putting pictures of yourself, you're giving all this personal information out. And unfortunately, what will happen, and has happened in some cases, is people get hurt. And the more and more of that happens, they'll try and protect themselves a little bit. The other component of it is what is being done with the information that's out there, who is taking that information and not using it necessarily for insidious purposes, but for advertising or kind of getting into your home with other products. And is that okay? Maybe it is, but we need to have more of a dialogue on that. So when you go onto an internet website, even an established one, Amazon or Barnes & Noble, whatever the company might be, who else knows you're on there? And what are they doing with that information? And most people aren't aware that when they go on, a lot of things happen. A lot of people can collect that information. And maybe some people don't care, but some people do. And what we're particularly interested in the Attorney General world is letting people know what it is they're doing. I mean, for example, there's something called FrostWire and LimeWire, where kids are basically stealing piracy. They're taking music for free. Instead of going to iTunes and paying 99 cents, they're taking thousands of songs. One of the things that happens there is they inadvertently join, for their parents on their computers, a peer-to-peer network. So personal information is being transported back and forth as well. Should parents be aware of that, and certainly should the kids be aware? Yes. And so what we're trying to do is make sure, as we do in the real world, the offline world, we make sure there's warnings and signals being sent.
Okay, the complexity of this is just very apparent, because you're dealing with all different age and comprehension levels, and this is just in your state alone. Then you've got the cross-border issues in states and the federal and international jurisdiction. States are in huge budget crunches. Where are you getting the money for these kinds of programs?
The programs, we try not to spend too much money, but we do partnerships with private companies as well, and a lot of the internet companies, and a lot of telecommunication companies. Comcast is a huge player in this space, and they're partnering with governmental agencies and putting money into protecting kids, for example. And so that's available. The other thing we do is try and work cooperatively right now with the big internet providers. And when I say we, I'm talking about attorneys general collectively, because that's where we're strongest. Obviously the tobacco case would be the best known, but that's where we are most effective, and the internet by definition crosses state lines, international lines, but certainly state lines. So we work cooperatively with MySpace to get them to turn over email addresses of over 90,000 people on their product so that we can compare them with sex offenders. We worked with Facebook in setting up a technological task force to see if age verification is available. We worked with Craigslist to remove basically they had an online brothel that was being operated over Craigslist. We got them to take that off. So we're working with companies. In Google, we did something called AdWords. We worked with them to get them to monitor some of the deceptive practices that were going on that they weren't even aware of. So we're doing a lot more cooperatively with them because the laws really don't exist yet to sort of sue them or not sue them, and bad press is not good for anybody. So far we've been able to accomplish that cooperatively, and hopefully we'll continue to go down that road.
So let's go back to the enforcement. How will the laws be developed? What's that process?
Well, people will sue each other, and there'll be things like standing that's established. You know, we had a case in Maryland where somebody bought a doll. They collected these dolls, and this was an antique doll, and they bought it from somebody in Oregon over eBay, and it was fraud. So there wasn't a real doll. Who can sue whom, and who can go after these people? And there was a case, and there was a lot of back and forth. Should it be Maryland? Should it be Oregon? And that was established that it was both, as I mentioned earlier. So once you get the standing issues, then you get into really fraud, and everything that's sort of illegal offline is illegal online. Child pornography. You know, kids will all the time now pass pictures of, maybe girlfriends or maybe other girls these pictures are taken with or without their cooperation or acknowledged. And then one boy will maybe pass on to another boy, one 14-year-old pass on to another 14-year-old. Well, they just transmitted child pornography. They just committed, in many cases, a federal offense or certainly a felony. And so, teaching that is part of it, but then going after it and going after a couple of the kids. We had a website called peoplesdirt.com that was operating in Maryland, which was the predecessor, a predecessor was Juicy Campus, which was this college website, which it was really blogging, really bad, harmful information mostly about girls, totally untrue, which were these blogs set up. And then this was for high school, peoplesdirt.com in Maryland. We got it removed from the internet. Now, how did we do that? There's First Amendment implications. So we couldn't just say, well, this is really bad. Girls aren't going to school because they're embarrassed and hurt by this. There's no positive aspects to this website. But it was billed as an educational billboard appropriate for 6-year-olds and up. So we went to the people that are advertising, Fortune 500 companies. They had no idea they were on this website. Got them to pull their ads from the website, which obviously drained the money off of it. Then we went to GoDaddy, which was the internet provider, and said, are you aware of what these people are doing? They weren't, because the contract was very different than what was actually being posted, and we got it taken down through typical, standard contract 101 law. And so, we were able to do it that way. So yes, sometimes the technology is very advanced, but the way in which we use our laws is not so much.
But General Gensler, listening to just that description of this one particular case, it's very labor intensive for you to find all of these connections. You've got a very wide purview as the state's Attorney General. How do you find the staff and the time to concentrate on this?
Well, it's just one of the many things we do. And, unlike, say, law firms or companies, we get paid what we get paid. We're all salaried, so we just have to prioritize what it is we're interested in doing.
And how much of a priority is this issue for you?
It's a high priority for us. In our state in particular, I have a special assistant that just does internet cases.
And why is that?
Because it's an area, a space where nobody else is, and the attorneys general, I think, have to be there, where literally nobody's going to be watching out what goes on the internet, and you're hoping that sort of the free market does it, but there needs to be some regulation, some oversight, somebody making sure that the criminal activity is detected and prosecuted. And so we do that, and many offices around the country, not all 50, but many of the Attorney General's offices have a person like we do, and we work with them every day and say, okay, what are the highest issues? Where can we make the biggest impact? And we do that. And the internet is nobody else is doing it. The federal government, they have pretty broad purview as well. But to get something passed on the federal side, it takes a long time to do. And often by the time that happens, they're on to the next technology. So We think we need to do it at the state level. We're the pilots of democracy, and we do it. And when we go after some cases, then we can sort of make sure everybody knows about it, and hopefully that they'll comport their behavior to the case we just went after.
Are there one or two things that if you could just flip a switch and make it happen right now that would make a huge difference in these kinds of issues?
I think that education. I mean, I really think the flipping the switch to make sure every kid understands the real dangers of the internet. Identity theft, child pornography, the privacy issues, the deceptive advertising. There's a lot out there, but it all comes down to one thing, education. And older people need the education. Seniors are targeted all the time, and that's more on these internet scams. The email scams. I was talking about the Nigerian cases and other cases. Your bank contacts you. I mean, simple as never respond to an email that's where they're contacting you in lieu of you contacting them. Or always deal with legitimate sites, companies that you would deal with offline. Those are the companies you ought to be dealing with online. Things we talk to seniors about that they just don't understand because they tend to be sometimes a little bit more gullible. Well, kids are a little bit more gullible too. And so the education, if I could flip a switch, it would be education and put it in the schools. Get the schools involved because it's essential. The schools will get involved when the kids mess up and conduct cyberbullying or do something really bad over the internet. That's when they'll get involved. They ought to get involved a lot earlier on the education side.
That was Maryland Attorney General Douglas Gansler. Now, the cable show features both domestic and international guests. And while in Los Angeles, we had the chance to learn about the cable industry in Europe with Manuel Konstamm, the head of the trade association, Cable Europe.
And I'm going to ask you to start by telling me about the state of the business after the recent financial crisis. How are things doing?
Things are pretty good in Europe still. I mean, remember the cable industry, like in the US, is a subscription-based business. And with 72 million subscribers in about 20 countries, it's still a business that's holding its own. It's grown last year. 2009 was a growth year. Revenue top line was around 3.5% for the industry as a whole, but much stronger growth in new services. Internet, broadband internet, high-speed broadband, telephony, and digital TV services.
Is there concern right now with the sovereign debt crisis, with access to capital markets to continue to grow the business?
That's not so much of a direct concern for the business itself, because our business is essentially about the consumer wallet, and in most countries the consumers don't have that much cause for concern. Of course, Greece is a different country and different story, but there's hardly any cable in that country. But when you talk about Northern Europe, where most of the cable is concentrated, and Central and Eastern Europe, those countries are still doing pretty well. Cable industries are also innovating at very fast pace. So we have no speed limits for high-speed broadband, 100 megabit plus services rolled out in most European countries, and that's really revving up the buying ability of the sector.
So broadband's driving the business these days?
Yes, a big part. Broadband on one hand and digital TV on the other hand, because European cable still is 65% analog. 40 million households still have to make the transition to digital, and that gives us still a long runway of growth.
From a regulatory perspective, for individual countries, are there pan-European standards that they have to meet, or is it really country by country?
Yeah, no, the telecom regulatory structure in Europe is largely governed through a European system, governed by the European Commission in Brussels, and then the European laws are being executed in the various countries. There's certain degrees of flexibility in the countries, but the overall framework is in Brussels, is European, is standardized, and that makes it life for cable companies that are operating across different territories a lot easier.
So you know that you can move from country to country and not have to face a different regulatory scheme.
Yeah.
That's the argument for having the union.
The union in first place. Telecommunications, I think, is one of the clear success stories of European regulation. One of the clear areas of legislation by the European Commission which has succeeded in largely having a standard structure across Europe.
You know, here in this country, we're having a big debate over content standards and also about network neutrality.
Yes.
Will you talk to us about the comparisons in Europe with those debates here?
Yeah, well, I think the net neutrality debate in Europe is a fairly rational debate. It's all about transparency, about service guarantees and getting customers the service that they paid for. So if there's debate about net neutrality, it's about those three things, and about getting companies to actually advertise the kind of services that they actually provide, and to be very honest about those kind of services. The whole debate about how content providers can contribute to networks, that's not such a big issue at this moment. We just had a 3-year revision of the telecom regulatory structure, and it includes a number of net neutrality provisions for all network operators, mainly about the service guarantees. And I don't see a big revision within the next 3 years again. There will be some debate and there will be some further service guarantees requested, but I don't see the same kind of intensity of the debate as you've seen here in the US.
Content regulation, let's stay with video, concern in this country over decency standards and programming access for younger people. Is that debate echoed in Europe?
Less so. That's traditionally been less an issue in Europe, and certainly with the ubiquity of all kinds of content on the internet, it is a cause of concern, of course, and cable companies and broadcasters are cooperating with each other and with government to ensure that you have more child-friendly environments. And one of the great things about video on demand and kind of interactive television is that you can create those kind of safe environments for children. And so we're working a lot on those kind of issues. On a regulatory side, it's not such a big issue. We have more discussions about how to make sure that content can travel across different platforms and all the intellectual property rights are properly paid for and sealed off. Because in Europe you have a lot of separate language areas, small countries with small language areas and small IPR and entities. And so as a company that wants to capitalize on pan-European business, you need to deal with a lot of different actors.
Where's the source for the greatest source for content that European consumers see? Is the United States still the majority producer? Or is
No. I mean, a lot from the Hollywood movies, yes, it's still a big chunk, but European sports is a big kind of content driver for premium TV. But in normal national TV viewing, actually public broadcasters are a force, a significant force, commercial force.
Beyond the boundaries of their own countries?
Well, but particularly within their own countries. In countries like Germany and France and Holland and UK, companies like BBC and ARD in Germany, they're multi-billion-dollar companies with huge budgets, very strong quality programming, their own whole programming facilities, and they are typically good for about half of all TV viewing in many countries. And then you got a couple of typically two, three very strong commercial channels per country that make up with the public broadcasters, the free TV environment. And in that environment, we are, with others, trying to build up this premium TV service.
In the history of your business in Europe, actually in the broadest sense, satellite distributors got a leg up before cable. Cable came into an established market. But now the telephone companies are getting into the video distribution. Where's the most robust communication for your operators in Europe these days?
Cable. What do you think? No, cable, of course, is a robust communication.
Sure, but who is cable's most robust competitor these days?
Okay. In that way, sorry about it. Didn't understand your question. I think satellite still is a strong competitor in countries like the UK and Germany and France, where you got big language areas and so strong kind of satellite platforms to deal with. IPTV is coming up, and is definitely an important force because it's the only platform that will be able to bundle the same way we bundle with broadband and telephony products. But no, we're fairly confident in the competition. We've been in the television business for 25, 30, 40 years, and most of the telecom companies are still new to the whole business of knowing how to sell good TV movies or how to sell a sports programming. So they have a technology that's in principle capable of competing head-on with cable, and it forces cable companies to invest in the same kind of functionalities, interactive television, HD, 3D TV and DVRs, And with that, I think we have a good kind of window of opportunity to stay ahead of the curve with that.
And therefore, what do you see as the biggest driver of your business over the next 3 years or so?
Well, that's really enhancing the TV experience. So on one hand, kind of pushing up the speeds for broadband, and on the other hand, enhancing the TV experience with a much more user-friendly digital TV experience, high-def and 3D, integrated DVRs and video on demand, personalizing the TV, making it an easy-to-use environment. There's been a lot of talk about that here today at the show, and that's going to be the same thing in Europe. You have to compete not so much with these other distributors like IPTV and satellite, but also with the web, with other users of the content on other platforms. And we need to make our systems robust and easy enough to compete with that.
How concerned are your providers that as broadband speeds get faster and faster, people will be just watching TV, as it's called, over the top?
It's happening, and it's happening more, obviously, but you have to work harder for it. You have to go to your PC, you have to kind of search what you're really looking for. It's not always the right quality, it's not always on as you want it to be on, and so it's all about convenience. You know, that the technology is there doesn't automatically mean that it's going to overtake the whole user experience. A good example is BBC iPlayer. BBC has an over-the-top platform for streaming all of its channels and more over the internet to their customers. And it started to pull away quite a bit of a number of viewers. Then they made a deal with Virgin, one of our members, Virgin Media, who built the BBC iPlayer platform on their digital TV box, cable. And within 6 months, they had more traffic on the digital box than over the streaming on the web. So
what's the lesson learned there?
Make it convenient, make it easy to use and convenient for your customers, and they will come. They will want to be with your, with your cable system. If it's easy integrated with the main TV system in the home, if it works seamlessly with web services, if it covers these kind of search functionalities that you have and that we're getting used to on the web. So that's where we need to go. That's where the whole industry needs to go.
So you've been in this business for a while. And closing question, help people understand from bearish to bullish where you are on the state of this business right now.
I'm pretty bullish. I'm absolutely bullish. I've been bullish on cable for the past 10 years, and I've been proven wrong since the early years 2000. But you got to stay the course. You got to keep innovating. You got to make sure that your customers want to be with you, and then the rest will follow.
And that was C-SPAN's Susan Swain talking with Manuel Konstamm of Cable Europe. More of these interviews will come your way over the next few months, but if you want to see these again or others, you can go to our website at cspan.org.